Our political commentators today, it's Dale, Husband and Liam Hehir. Kia ora korua.
Tēnā koe, Kathryn. Hey, Liam. Kia ora. It's nice to talk to both of you. Mihi ane ka korua.
I'm very good too. Atamare to you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. Dale, of course, a long-time broadcaster and radio Wātea presenter, hosting current affairs program, and Liam Hehir is a Palmerston North lawyer, political commentator and a member of the National Party. Right, what a week. The good news on the economic front midweek for the government, that 50 basis point cutting of the OCR, and talk about some, good progress on the economy. End of week, talking about a significant new spend on defence. Let's pick up on the latter first of all. Judith Collins, very, very interesting and worth a listen on Morning Report this morning. But Liam, it looks like whether planned or unplanned, there is going to be a significant investment had to be made in our defence forces. Your take?
Yeah, look, it's the independent nature of our foreign policy continues to come under great stress. It was one thing when we declared our independence, so to speak, towards the later stage of the Cold War. When we weren't a primary focus strategically. Now with the Trump administration sort of pivoting to the Indo-Pacific region, we're just not going to have that luxury anymore. We're sort of being forced to choose. I mean, the idea that we're going to build up a navy to rival the Chinese People's Liberation Navy or have any kind of independent military deterrent is risible. So we're sort of being forced by default back into the Western fold. The interesting thing to me, I suppose, is that we always frame this as about our independence from the United States. But actually, the question is, can we be independent of Australia, right? Like, so if Australia, our one true military ally, is forced into a more confronting stance, or forced to increase its own defence spending in response to American pressure, can we really resist it? So
she was interesting this morning, Judith Collins. She was arguing that independence simply meant everyone's independent. Australia's independent. Yes. She says we're independent. Yep. She did reference the fact that we have been sharing for a long time with Five Eyes and other cooperations with the United States. But your point is walking that delicate kind of grammatical line, it's going to become more and more difficult.
Yeah. What does independent mean? I mean, we can independently choose to do whatever we want, right? But I think for a lot of people, independence kind of has connotations of being non-aligned as well, right? Or our alignment only being towards, our own interest and trying to be friends with everyone and enemies to nobody. But it's just not going to be sustainable.
She made the point also, China's the number one trading partner, America's number two, Australia's number three, Liam, and damage to either of those top two would be very significant.
It would be nice if one of our security partners, the United States, wasn't sort of by implicitly trying to threaten us with tariffs, whereas the one that's the enemy has nothing of the sort.
Yeah, not an enemy as far as the government's concerned. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
okay.
certainly not.
One more point. You mentioned we're not going to be buying Navy assets to rival what China has. But what they are increasingly talking about, the Prime Minister as well, is moving near as possible to 2% of GDP spending. Now, currently, 4 billion is going to have to become something more like 8 billion. And that is not insignificant in the situation the government books are in.
Not since the 50s or 60s. I mean, have we spent that much on defence? But again, that was a time when the theatre was most relevant to conflict. So, I mean, look, put it this way, it's a huge amount of money, all right? But if we're forced into it by trade pressures from the United States, it's a small price to pay compared to what we might have to pay if the United States starts to put the pressure on.
Dale, what's your take on what's been happening in the last few days?
Well, it's been amazing to witness, but never before in the history of our nation has a time been so important where we did or do stand our own ground on our own feet with our own mana motuhake. We talk about independence. Well, really, tino rangateratanga is not just a Māori term to be used for Māori. It could encompass our whole land. I notice how casually we can call one of those, particularly the country in the middle of the Tasman at the moment, is our enemy. And so we've got to be really careful about our rhetoric. In a sense, we're lucky that we've got such a seasoned Foreign Affairs Minister as Winston Peters. This is delicate manoeuvres. delicate discussions. The terminology we use, we have to be very careful here. China has never been aggressive towards us. We've got a couple of egomaniacs seemingly running the US, and we appear internationally to be in their pocket. We don't need to. And so everyone's talking about upping the spend on defence. What about more consideration of military neutrality and standing in a way that Switzerland has? We've had our nuclear-free policies. We were regarded highly across the globe for our independent thinking there, and New Zealand has broken new ground time and time again with women's voting, with the social welfare system. You know, we are an independent nation, for the most part, pretty fair-minded thinkers, and here's an opportunity for us again to say, no, well, we're not playing ball in that way. The fact that we're tied up with AUKUS Pillar 2, with Five Eyes, even Rocket Lab, where initially everyone lauded this young bloke because he had developed a rocket launch facility on Māori land at the Mahia Peninsula, turns out that it's taking up Pentagon payload. So we've just got to be really careful about how we present ourselves here.
All right. Let's roll back on some of the rhetoric. I think we need to talk about it. To be fair, it's the United States that seems to be going head-to-head with China, primarily in a trade conflict as things stand. So I take your point on that.
And communism, of course, they're seen as the yellow peril by America.
Well, look, I haven't heard those words used out of the incumbent president. It's the current situation is more of a sharpening trade conflict potentially between the two. AUKUS Pillar 2 we are not yet part of, and that is precisely some of where the hot debate is going to come as to whether there should be a deepening of any kind of formal relationship on that front. And on the question of Rocket Lab, I think the issue that has been raised is whether some of the launching that does go on carries potential dual use capabilities. I know certainly one of the Russian authorities made comment about that in a particular forum. They're delicate times, Dale. You're right. And are you saying stay out, don't go any deeper in?
Well, investigate whether there is some potential for us to stand on our own and say, no, we're here to support people. We're not here about tariffs and economies. And so I know that you touched on it, Liam, that you can't be friends to all, but we have a unique position geographically, and we should have that manifest as a unique position politically.
The other point that Judith Collins made this morning, putting some context around what might be happening now, she referenced the Cook Islands deals, plural, that are understood to have been agreed. And she talked, of course, about the nodules, which are extremely valuable on its seabed floor. And I think it has been revealed that, cooperation and research into those is part of the deal with China. And she framed this as essentially, we have valuable resources on our doorstep, Cook's doorstep specifically, and as she put it, very small lock to protect it. Again, Liam, in some ways there is a little surprise on the interest here, the clear geographical interest in the Pacific. What is happening is a very sharp pivot towards it, including potentially from the US.
Yeah, and so it's not quite right to say that, that China is totally benign with respect to New Zealand, right? Because it has been one of the controversies of February, is that these the deepening ties with the Cook Islands, behind our back. Now, the Cook Islands have, we have recognised their sovereignty. We can hardly go back and tell them, that they can't do deals with who they want. But it is also contrary to our interests to be cut out of the discussions there for things to happen behind our back. And, it's not like China isn't aware of that, right? And so, as China continues to rise, it's going to continue to flex its strength and its muscles there. We are an island country, as we aside from the Cook Islands, the mainland of New Zealand is an island archipelago, and we do not have the resources to really defend ourselves by ourselves. So, I just think, countries don't have friends; countries have interests, and our interests are in being protected from a larger power And I think that it's naive to think that we can continue to have that protection just amongst ourselves, or
Well, the question being
continue
raised is
walking the
what
tightrope.
protection is the US offering under
Yeah,
its
well,
new
pretty
administration?
weak, right? I mean,
Everyone is trying to understand. Ukraine's trying to understand that.
yeah,
Europe's
that's
trying to
right.
understand that.
Yeah, the unreliable. This is this is the damage that's happened to the American image, right? Is that they've made themselves unreliable partners. I mean, no American president's going to care too much about New Zealand, or put too much out for New Zealand. So we are just in a really, really difficult spot, because at the end of the day, despite the unreliableness of the United States and the People's Republic of China are not moral equivalents.
All right.
They're not.
All right, let's move on from that. Obviously, there is a heck of a lot more to come, but what is increasingly coming out of the leadership of this government is a signal towards a much greater investment, and it will be an expensive investment in our defence infrastructure. The Minister herself saying it's been 35 years of cuts to it. Okay, let's look on at some of that economic news. There was some good news on the economic front, but what is also still happening, Dale, is this outflow of people and delving into those statistics, those immigration statistics, not only the young ones that you might expect to go, those in their 20s, but those in their 30s and 40s as well. How much of a political problem does this pose the incumbent government?
Well, it won't pose so much to this government, but it certainly will to those that follow on. When we look at it through a Māori lens as well, and look, the greatest threat has been quoted before to Māori development is Australia, and the dissatisfaction so many of our young people are feeling with the politics, the cost of living in New Zealand, and no real light at the end of the tunnel for many. They're just packing up bags and bolting, as we can see. And, 47,000 young people, 47,000 have gone and perhaps won't come back for decades, if at all. And the 18 to 30-year-olds at 40%. Well, these are our young mums and dads. These are our people who are going to fuel the economy. And the burden, in some ways, is going to be left too many within the Māori population because of our youthful numbers here. And so somebody's going to end up paying for the superannuation of tomorrow. And so this is going to cause problems for decades to come. And the loss of human capital is really the disappointment. We see it every week when they pan across sports stadiums in Australia, packed full of Māori and Pacifica people who grew up here in New Zealand. But ordinary politics and ordinary politicians have been driving them out, just as Muldoon did back in the late 70s, early 80s.
What are you making of the economic news? It got buried pretty quickly, didn't it, Liam? What is the story the government wants to be able to tell between now and the next election?
Well, I mean, the government wants to be able to say that the green shoots are here and we're back on track. But there's this interesting sort of dynamic, right, where the government wants to take credit for the good things that happen while blaming its predecessors for the bad things that have happened. And the reverse is true too, right? And so the government's critics are very quick to say, look, reductions in interest rates and inflation, that's you can't take credit for that. That was something that was forecast well before you came into power. But the same is true of unemployment, right? And so if we go back and look at the pre-election forecast last year, 2 years ago, things are basically on track, right? The unemployment is peaking as predicted, but inflation and interest rates are coming down as predicted. And what that goes to show, I think, is that there is a bit of an illusion of control. New Zealand is a small trading country. We are subject to forces and trends, and they tend to set everything, and everything flows out of them. Human capital is mobile, so when things are going well, people will come back. When they're not going well, people will leave. And, it's a bit of an illusion as to whether or not individual government policies, especially in the short term, are going to affect that. But you can't have it both ways, right? And so either a government of the day gets the credit for the things that are going well and takes the blame for the things that are going badly, or it doesn't. People are very clearly going to always hold the government of the day to account. So I think it's fair enough for the government to take credit for the things when it's going to inevitably take the blame for the bad things.
It's going to come down to the hearts and minds at the time, isn't it? How people are feeling at the time.
But the problem is the real problem the government has, though, I think, is that it's easier to lose votes than to win them, right? And so we haven't had a real honeymoon. We haven't had this sort of first term surge that we normally have. and as you have gradual improvements, I'm just quite skeptical of the idea that the government's going to really surge. I think the government's going to be in the defensive all the way to the election next year.
Yeah, but I noticed, Liam, you still use the term back on track. And really, and it is encouraging to see Adrian Orr lower the Reserve Bank, resulting in lower interest rates. Of course, that's to be encouraged, but we've got this sort of open door policy, which we might touch on in a moment anyway, Kathryn, with inviting investment in from offshore. But I have to take issue with the Māori unemployment rate and stats and the child poverty stats. These are indicators, social indicators, that our country has prided itself on in the past, and they make for horrible reading. Māori unemployment now is way above that of the norm, and with our youthful unemployment skyrocketing to around 20%. So, you might paint a picture of an improving economy and getting back on track, but I still feel that this mob is wrecking the place, and there's more and more problems ahead for us.
Have you ever had to take out a business loan, Dale?
No, I've sort of worked for myself over the years.
Well, I've got a lot of business. I've got business debt, and I can tell you that when the rates come down and things look more stable, that is when we will expand, and it's a real relief. And until you've actually been in that position of having a business loan, you don't know quite what the stress is and what an inhibitor of growth that it is. Look, a rising tide lifts all boats.
But you're lucky you can get a business loan too, Liam. There's some privileges that afford people from certain sectors of our society the knowledge about the financial system that is not shared with people in what's formerly known as Decile 1 schools. Let's call it what it is. The poor people don't get the financial literacy that those in well-heeled schools do, and therefore never get in a position to take a business loan.
And they're in need of the jobs that only come from an expanding business environment.
Low-paid jobs. That's part of the problem, and that's why everyone's leaving for Aussie.
Weren't you just complaining about unemployment?
Hang on, guys. Hang on.
Yeah, but you've got to have purposeful employment that is well compensated.
All right, let's move on. There is a burgeoning and sizable Māori economy, Dale, as well. I don't want to leave that out of it, but I take your point with respect to the disproportionate impact on Māori in those latest unemployment stats. You wanted to go to the announcements of the foreign investment changes. We're into this routine of a Sunday announcement on something. And what did you make of those announcements, Dale? Just
fairly predictable. The doors are open. Come on in if you're moneyed up. And we'll make it easier for you to do so. So no onus to suggest how this is going to improve New Zealand, where the profits are going to go to. Many of them will ship them straight back offshore. There's no demand that they reinvest some of the profits made from their initial capital when they do come in. So I just think that, we've just been a little bit free with this and, carrying on like South Seas hookers and allowing anyone to come in and do what they like for whatever they like.
Well, there's a few restrictions that have been put on it. The argument that's coming back the other way, Liam, if you want to pick up on it, is that it will allow hopefully some physical investment here and hopefully some jobs to accompany. But are they loosening things to the extent where they can't maintain a say over that?
No, I don't think so. Like, Dale wants to complain about the disease and he wants to complain about the cure. You can complain about the human capital flowing out of the country. You complain about there not being enough high-paying jobs. And the reason why we don't have enough high-paying jobs is because we don't have either the human capital or the investment capital to create them. And so, I'm very much in favour, I think, of a liberal approach to this. This country is starved of capital. And one way to get capital in is to get people who have capital living here.
Alrighty.
And so we just have to do it.
The Stats Boss standing down over the handling of data, and the bulk of the two reports that came out last week were to do with the lack of the normal, quite strict protocols, things like signing confidentiality agreements, etc., being attached to the sharing of information with primary third party being whānau ora commissioning agency, and then some subcontractors. We still don't have any and won't as yet have any issue on whether that data was inappropriately used. Census data, vaccination data, Dale. But what did you make of the fact that a Stats Boss did go, and what did you make overall of what was learned about the handling of information?
Well, seemingly he had a pretty decent handle and was welcoming Māori approaches to sourcing the data, which is very important because our people have a mistrust of governments and we have a mistrust of the way that they'll use the data. As it turns out, they were rightly founded because, as you say, the non-compliance and the confidentiality issues should have been addressed right from the start. He did the principled thing by stepping aside, but that still doesn't rebuild the trust that has been lost. We've got issues of data sovereignty in this country, and now all of a sudden you realise that the data you were supposed to be furnishing that was confidential is in fact not confidential. So no, there's a lot that needs to be rebuilt in Stats New Zealand, but it probably reaches much wider through government departments than we realise.
Stats, the people within Stats warning Liam that they were not following their own protocols. Was it a case where the sort of ends justified the means? They were so desperate to get that participation rate up in the census, for example, that they just took shortcuts in terms of the government's department's handling of this side of things?
It's absolutely bizarre. I mean, look, I've negotiated contracts with the government. You take the terms the government offer. It's not often much of a negotiation, especially around those points where the government is insisting on the good governance parts of it. So the fact that basic boilerplate provisions around confidentiality were removed is just an absolute head scratcher. I think it does show that the public sector has become quite degraded in some ways in terms of standards, and a real tightening up is going to have to happen. But I also think it just shows there were good intentions behind it, right? And so there were intentions partly flowing out of court cases about the need to engage more with Māori and to have a high trust model where the Māori interest in Māori data was recognised, and that's good. That's a good thing. The problem is that when you make that the enemy of robust systems and integrity, is that you're setting up for really counterproductive backfiring. And the point has to be made, I think, that Māori in this country have every right to expect that their data be protected and kept confidential as everyone else.
Thank
you.
In
the rush,
finish your thought, Liam.
Oh no, just in the rush to do a good thing, the safeguards are overlooked, and that can't happen again.
Thanks, both of you. Kia ora koroa. That is Liam Hehir and Dale Husband with our political commentary today. A busy old week it is on that front, and we've barely got going.